The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
City University of New York Chancellor James B. Milliken presented Clinton Foundation President and Chief Executive Officer Donna Shalala with the Chancellor's Medal in recognition of her long-standing dedication to higher education and public service. The award was presented at the 11th Annual CUNY New York Times Women's Leadership Conference, where women at the forefront of New York politics, nonprofits, business, media, and higher education encourage, mentor, and support women student leaders. Let's take a look.
I'm delighted to join you, my second of the CUNY Annual Women's Leadership Conferences. I came here last year after being a newly minted chancellor, one of the exciting ways to start the school year, and I'm delighted to be back again. It's a great opportunity for us to recognize all of you, but also to recognize the many women throughout CUNY who help us do what we do so well every day. 9 of our leaders of our colleges today are very capable women leaders, following in the footsteps of our keynote speaker today. So it's customary at these events, and we've done some of it already, to recognize great female leaders who got their starts at CUNY schools, and we're very proud of them. You heard a little bit about Bella Abzug earlier, a graduate of Hunter. Many of you know other famous alumni of our institutions, Barbara Boxer, senator from California, Ruby Dee, another graduate of Hunter. But what I want to do for a few minutes today is to underscore the importance of female leaders that some of you may not know, but have still made a tremendous difference and who hail from CUNY colleges. I'm going to give you a few examples. Now, many of you may know Carmen Arroyo, Ostos Community College graduate, the first Puerto Rican woman as well as the first Hispanic woman in the New York State Assembly. Jeanette Brown from Lehman College, a highly successful chemist, winner of the American Chemical Society's award for encouraging disadvantaged students into careers in the chemical sciences. Deborah Tobias Peritz from Brooklyn College was the first female New Jersey Attorney General and the first female Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court. But I want to take a special moment to recognize a real trailblazer, Irene Morgan Kirkcaldy, who earned a master's degree from Queens College. And long before Rosa Parks' historic trailblazing by defying a racist law and giving up her seat in Alabama in 1955, Irene Morgan, another African-American woman, refused to give up her seat in 1944 on an interstate bus. And when she was arrested in Virginia, she tore up the arrest warrant and resisted arrest. She later pleaded guilty to resisting arrest, but adamantly refused to pay a $10 fine for violating a segregation ordinance. Her battle worked its way through the courts, and in 1946, the Supreme Court voted to strike down the law of segregating interstate buses. One of her lawyers was a young man named Thurgood Marshall. I could go on and add to the list, but what I want to stress today is the lesson that our communities and our society benefits when we lean on the shoulders of the brightest, the most articulate, and the most creative women. But we still have much work to do in removing barriers that hold back some of the best among us. Here's an example that I find particularly galling. According to the Census Bureau, in 2014, women narrowed the gap between their pay as compared to men. Their earnings rose from 78.3% of what men earn in 2013 to 78.6% in 2014. So, 0.3%. Cause for cheering? I don't think so. It's unacceptable. And it's even more unacceptable when these same figures from the Census Bureau show us that the pay of African American women and Latinas actually slipped further behind men from 2013 to 2014. Many think that the corporate world is a model of meritocracy, but there's recent new research showing that the disparity in pay is even greater for ambitious women trying to climb a career ladder in corporate America. Gender pay differences are even more significant for women in the executive ranks than they are at the entry levels. These kinds of examples should both dismay and motivate us to continue taking steps to level the playing field. What could be more satisfying than helping our country release and reward the locked-up potential that exists today? So, this is exactly the right way, I think, to begin the introduction of today's keynote speaker, Secretary Donna Shalala. Donna is yet another exceptionally accomplished member of the CUNY family, having served and distinguished herself as president of Hunter College from 1980 to 1987. It may be hard to think of locked-up potential, though, when describing Donna. I came to this conclusion after reading her abbreviated resume, which is 23 pages long. And there's a reason for that. So I'm going to start rather early in this. I won't go through all 23 pages, but there are a few things, and this one didn't exactly come from the resume. But early on, Donna's leadership abilities were evident. Her sister Diane explained once in a newspaper article how when they were 10 years old, her father tried to make sure they were safe in the basement of their Cleveland home as a tornado raced toward the neighborhood. Suddenly, they couldn't find Donna. Their frantic search led them to a nearby street corner where this 10-year-old future leader was directing traffic. Fortunately for us, she never stopped. While teaching in New York, Donna became the director and treasurer of the Municipal Assistance Corporation, which did the heavy lifting in rescuing New York City from near bankruptcy in the 70s. She served later in that decade as Assistant Secretary for Policy, Research, and Development at the Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Carter. She went on to be Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at Madison, making her the first woman to run a Big Ten university. Among her policy initiatives was sharply increasing minority enrollment in the faculty and among the student body. Her hallmark has always been not just her intelligence and her skill, but her extraordinary effectiveness. She continued to demonstrate this when she joined President Clinton as Secretary of Health and Human Services for his entire 2 terms in office. She managed the welfare reform process. She made health insurance available to more than 3 million uncovered children. She raised child immunization rates to the highest levels in history and revitalized the National Institutes of Health, among many other accomplishments. The Washington Post described her as one of the most successful government managers in modern times. But it turns out that this cabinet position was only a stop on the way. She then became president of the University of Miami for more than a decade and was that school's first female leader. This was a transformative period for one of America's great universities. Earlier this year, she became president and CEO of the Clinton Foundation. She's collected too many honors to name during these years. In 2008, though, she did receive one of the most notable. President Bush, recognizing her gifts and contributions, presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's a hard act to follow. But Donna, you bring such honor to your CUNY family and represent the ideals that we are trying to instill in the next generation of students, and we want to try our best to recognize that. So on behalf of my colleagues and the 275,000 degree-seeking students at CUNY, I would like to now present you with a symbol of our affection, our respect, and the highest distinction awarded at CUNY, the Chancellor's Medal. It's difficult to imagine a more worthy recipient, and it is our way of expressing deep appreciation for your service, your traffic directing skills, and the example you have set, particularly for ambitious and talented young women such as those gathered here today. They're fortunate to have your example. Congratulations, Donna.
Thank you very much. here. This auditorium was actually, this playhouse is actually named for CUNY, someone who attended CUNY. Sylvia Kay, actually, she was Danny Kaye's wife, but she was more than that. She was a producer and a writer, and she actually went to Brooklyn College. I want to point out to the president of Brooklyn, but had an affiliation with Hunter, so she donated the money. And during the time I was president, and she had one thing that she wanted to take place. She wanted wings that were big enough for musicals, because of course the Kays were very involved in musicals, and she picked the color of the chairs. And you know, when someone gives you $5 million, you will let them pick the color of the chairs. The first lesson in leadership is if they hand you over $5 million, they can pick the colors of the chairs. I'm delighted to be here with you. I want to thank Chancellor Milliken, I want to thank Jennifer Rabb and the other presidents of CUNY. I want to thank my old friend, or my friend of long standing, Jay Hershenson. We've known each other. Jay and I have known each other since he was a student leader at Queens. And then he went on to work in the CUNY office, and he's a remarkable individual. And we were commenting that this public service program, and I want to congratulate all of you, is named for a really wonderful man who died too young, Ed Rogowski, who was a colleague of all of ours at CUNY and a very special human being. I'm not going to talk very long. They gave me 6 to 8 minutes, which, you know, for a college president is almost impossible. But I want to say a couple of things to you, because I grew up not in a rich household. I didn't grow up in the suburbs. I didn't end up in Ivy League institutions. I ended up in good institutions. I was a student leader from the time I was directing traffic at the corner in my hometown of Cleveland. I came from a working class family. Everybody in my family worked. When people talk about more women are moving into the workforce, I think, when I was growing up, all the women in my family worked. They worked for economic reasons. I didn't come from a family in which anyone stayed at home to take care of the kids. They may have stayed there for 6 months, but they all worked. And my mother certainly worked her whole life. She practiced law until she was 90 years old, but she didn't go to law school until she was 50. She was a teacher. And she decided to go to law school. I tell the story that she wanted to go to law school. When I asked her why she wanted to go to law school, she wanted the flexibility so she could play tennis. My mother was a very good tennis player. So I come from a family of women who worked, and I come from a family of men who pushed their daughters to get degrees, to be leaders in their community. So I was lucky. I came from a big, extended Lebanese family. My entire family, my father had 9 brothers and sisters. My mother had 11. We all lived in the same neighborhood. And so I grew up with a huge support system. And even now, my cousins are like brothers and sisters. And that's the kind of background I came from, which gave me a certain amount of confidence. Not arrogance, but a certain amount of confidence, because I felt loved from the beginning. But it was really school that made a big difference for me. And I was a student leader from the time I was in elementary school to junior high school to college. In fact, I can't say that my college career was so academically distinguished, but my leadership was very distinguished. I just got an award from Syracuse, my graduate school alma mater, for their alumni award, and I pointed out that there were 2 things that characterized my career at Syracuse. I was on probation for the PhD program because my undergraduate grades were not so great. And I occupied the administration building with fellow students during the Cambodia crisis. So I lay out my credentials to make sure that you don't think that I'm an absolute goody-goody. I've been through what many of you have been through. And to talk a little about leadership, I want to talk about this room a little bit, because it's an example, it's a good example. When I was president of Hunter, and Jennifer, you'll appreciate this, One morning, the vice president for student affairs came running in and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "the worst thing happened last night. The student leaders had invited a somewhat radical reverend from Brooklyn, actually, to come speak. And he arrived 2 hours late. So he started speaking at 11 o'clock. And the person that was responsible for the building and for the lights and for the microphones said he could only work until midnight. And warned the students that he could only work until midnight, he was only paid until midnight, and he'd have to turn out the lights and turn off the microphone. So the Reverend started about 11:30 and was still talking at midnight, and the guy turned off the lights and went home. The students were furious, and you can imagine the Reverend and what his views were. So the students were about to march on my office. And what did I do? I picked up the phone and I called the Reverend and I apologized. I said it shouldn't have happened. He was welcome back. I would personally come and introduce him, even though I didn't agree with his views, and I would make sure that the lights and the microphones worked as long as he wanted to speak. By the time the students got to the elevators, they had heard from the Reverend that the president had apologized. Now, this is a very important lesson in leadership, because everybody will give you a long list of things that leaders have to do. They have to be quick, and they have to be humble, in my judgment. It doesn't make any difference whether you've worked for a president or still work for a president the way I do, or whether you're a president of a university or president of your student government or head of an organization. You've got to be willing to apologize when appropriate and say you're wrong. Now, I wasn't personally responsible for the lights that were turned off, but I was responsible for the institution, and therefore I had to take responsibility for those lights. And the fact that I was willing to pick up the phone, he was so shocked. And to this day, every time he runs into me, he puts his arm around me and says, "I'll remember that day." That showed real leadership. But I tell you that story because too many people think of leaders as rigid, as arrogant, as knowing it all. And I always have assumed that I didn't know it all, that I could always learn things. Let me assure you, I've learned a lot from Jane Hershenson. And Phil Berry, the vice chair of the board, who's now head of human resources at the Clinton Foundation, I've already learned a lot from him. I'm still learning. And you can still learn if you're students. And you can still learn for the rest of your life. A lot of this discussion about ceilings, glass ceilings and all of those things, and about shattering glass ceiling is in your head. Don't ever let anyone tell you there's something you can't do. Lesson number one, don't let anyone ever tell you there's something you can't do. If you hit a brick wall, just turn and go in another direction and keep moving. That's my philosophy of life. I hit brick walls I still hit brick walls. You think because I've got a long resume of 23 pages, I don't hit brick walls? I still hit brick walls. Let me assure you. And so I think the brick walls are in our heads. I think the glass ceilings are in our heads. But we have to be prepared to take on the glass ceilings, to take on the barriers. And that means that we have to learn how to focus. Too many student leaders that I talk to or write recommendations for, they're all over the place. They're in 14 different organizations. You have to learn how to do a couple of things really well. And to learn how to lead, you really have to be focused, because you have to be able to listen to people. And you learn best if you listen. You're never going to have followers just by looking behind you. You're going to have followers by listening to people. The best lesson I ever got in listening to people was when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in a mud village in southern Iran. One of our assignments, and we were really isolated, one of our assignments was to build a school in the mud village. We were working on an agricultural college as well, but to build a school. And so my job was to convince the mullah, the head of the village, that we should be able to build a school. So I went trotting off to talk to the mullah, new college graduate. I was like a month out of college or something. And I'd been a student leader. And I said, I know you care about the children in your community. I mean, I really made a pitch to him. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a school here and the government's willing to pay to build the school and the community can hire the teacher. And he said, nah, we don't need a school. We need a mosque. So I went trotting back to the other Peace Corps volunteers and they said, we can't build a mosque. There's this church-state thing. We're federal government employees. We can't go around building mosques. So for almost 4 months, I was in an ongoing conversation with this mullah. And he actually liked me because I had brought a letter from my grandmother. My family, as I said, was Lebanese. And as I was leaving the house, my father and my parents did not want me to go to the Peace Corps. But my grandmother said she's going to the old country. And so she gave me this letter to give to the head of the village. The letter said, this is to introduce Donna Shalala, the daughter of a great sheikh in Cleveland, Ohio. And so, you know, he kind of liked me and I was the one that had the connection with him. So for months, I kept going back to him, making new arguments about the school. Meanwhile, we were working on the agricultural college, so we're really busy. And he kept saying, but we need a mosque, we need a mosque, we need a mosque. And finally I went to the Peace Corps guys and said, Peace Corps doesn't even know we're down here, let alone the President of the United States. Why don't we help them build a mosque? You guys have invented a new kind of straw brick. Let's help them build a mosque. So we helped them build a mosque. I've only built one mosque in my life, that was it. And we dedicated the mosque, and the day we dedicated the mosque, the mullah came up to me and he said, I think we ought to have a school. Other people's priorities. When I came to Hunter, I surveyed the faculty and the staff and the students, and all of them said the same thing. I was shocked. I was a good social scientist, so I always believe in surveys when you go to an institution, because you want to know the baseline. Everybody said the same thing. They wanted the place to be safe and clean. No one said they wanted higher pay or more offices or more student offices or anything else. They said I was stunned. And so I did that, and that gave me a certain amount of credibility. So you have to listen to your fellow students and find out what their priorities are as well. It's a very important lesson. You also have to be optimistic. I think that I live with a lot of critics, a lot of people, all my career. In fact, if you live in academic institutions, they're trained to be critics. They're not trained to be optimists. They're trained to be critics. And so there's always someone around that says, oh, you can't do that. We've never done that before. You've heard that yourselves. No student leader has ever asked for that. You've got to be optimistic. Great leaders are optimists. People want a president of the United States that makes them feel good about themselves, about their country, and about the future for their children. The same thing with leaders in universities, with student leaders. People want, your fellow students want leaders that feel good, that make them feel good about who they are, about their institution. Is CUNY in the house? You answered yes. That's optimism. You're at one of the best universities in the world. You have world-class faculty. And you ought to take pride that you're here and have the opportunity to be here. But everything you do ought to be fueled by optimism, about feeling good about your future, even though you don't have a clue what your future is going to be. I didn't have a clue where I was going to end up. I just looked for one adventure after the other. People come to me all the time and they say, you know, I want to lay out the next 5 years. And I think, ooh, sounds boring. Why don't you just keep your eyes open for opportunities and develop a set of skills that are saleable? When I hire people, I look at what they've done in college, not just their degrees or the grades they have. I want to see all the other things they've done, whether they've led people, whether they know how to work with people, and particularly whether they know how to work with people from different backgrounds. Because the one thing that CUNY will teach you is that people hear things differently. When you get older and you have to manage people from different ethnic groups and different backgrounds, you learn how to speak clearly and how to repeat yourself, because that's the key to the future. And you're going to learn that here in CUNY because of the diversity of the student body. And I'm not just talking about race. I'm talking about ethnicity. I'm talking about religion. I'm talking about people that hear things differently because of their backgrounds and have different priorities and different interests. People ask me all the time, how do you get to be a cabinet officer? How do you get to work for a president? Look around this room and figure out which one of your fellow students is going to run for president and keep in touch with them for 30 years. These are lessons for a lifetime, and I've had a lifetime of lots of experiences. But don't think I haven't fallen on my face. I've made mistakes. I've made mistakes in people I've hired. I've made mistakes in people I've fired. I've made mistakes in not listening to people. A whole career of making mistakes. And I learned from all of them, I hope. And I still have a lot to learn. You have to have an attitude, and you ought to come out of higher education thinking that you still have a lot to learn. You ought to come out of higher education caring about people and thinking that leadership is about bringing people along and about coaching them and nudging them. In all the jobs I've ever had, I thought of myself as a tugboat captain, trying to pull the thing along, but as a world-class nudger. But more than anything else, you ought to have fun doing it. Congratulations and best wishes.